Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Ericka Wills, and I'm here today with Jaz Brisack, who is one of the original organizers at the Buffalo Starbucks. That was the first Starbucks to organize in December 2021 was recognition. Is that correct, Jaz?
Yes.
Yes, and Jaz is an amazing labor activist and organizer, as well as a really accomplished scholar, as she attended the University of Mississippi and then was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University. So I'm so happy that she can join us today and give us some insight into what has happened with Starbucks, the current labor movement, young people organizing, and what she's doing now. So thank you, Jaz. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Could you, I guess, start at the beginning? Let's start where this all started and talk a little bit about why that organizing campaign began in Buffalo and what that process was like to organize the first organized Starbucks in the United States.
So this really started with an industry union project in upstate New York in the coffee industry. So in 2017, my organizing mentor, Richard Bensinger, organized the first baristas union in the country at a little coffee chain in Ithaca, New York called Gimme Coffee. And from there came this understanding that, we couldn't just organize one coffee shop chain as a hot shop and then, expect it to flourish as a union shop where workers were negotiating, improvements to benefits or to working conditions or to wages. Without organizing the rest of the industry. And we realized, with the kind of profit margins in this industry, some of the smaller shops would never be able to get benefits like healthcare if the other companies were able to, drive profits low and keep undercutting the union shops. So that started a commitment to organize the entire coffee industry, and kind of like our union had done 100 years ago in garment worker textile industries, try to build union density. So fast forward to 2019, we had a campaign at Spot Coffee in Buffalo where 3 workers were initially fired for trying to organize, which was half of the people who'd come to the first committee meeting. But then the community of Buffalo, which is an overwhelmingly pro-union working class community, rallied behind those workers, said, we're not going to patronize a company that's doing that. We demand that Spot Coffee sign the fair election principles, reinstate these workers, and become the union Spot. And so they did that under pressure, of course, but they did that. And then it became the largest unionized coffee shop chain in the country at that time. And because of the overlap between Spot workers and Starbucks workers and the knowledge of this community support, it made sense to try to start the Starbucks campaign in Buffalo and organize Starbucks so that they weren't, putting Spot under. During the pandemic. The Spot workers voted to stay closed for safety reasons, and the Starbucks workers didn't have a way to vote to stay closed. So they were operating and, passing COVID around the stores. So anyway, I decided to work in the same industry that I was organizing. I wanted to try to organize, my own workplace internally. And we didn't know going in, what exactly it was going to turn into. But when I got in there, I started seeing, Starbucks partners wanted a union. Most of them had come to the company because of, the values that it claimed to hold, which were progressive values and social justice values. And most of them, understood that in order to be consistent with that, Starbucks would need to recognize the union.
Thank you. That context is really helpful for understanding how that came about in Buffalo itself and how it connects to the organizing happening across the industry. The idea that we can't just organize here and there, but to make real change, we need to make sure that we organize entire industries as well as companies across, Starbucks itself. So as I think that we're reaching perhaps close now to 300 organized Starbucks, how do you feel about that? Is that something that you foresaw when you got started on the project? And how have you been involved in that process or seen that process change as it became a really hot national campaign. I would say arguably, or maybe not even arguably, one of the largest success stories of organizing during the pandemic, and certainly the largest organizing campaign that is been across the country doing things successfully with young workers as well.
Well, when we got started, I thought that we were going to be able to try to go for the whole market or district of the Buffalo stores as part of that industrial union and try to organize the entire city at once. And then corporate started responding and started flooding our stores with corporate people, you know, sweeping our bathroom or sweeping our floors and cleaning our bathrooms and intimidating workers and pulling people into, you know, captive audience meetings and one-on-ones. And it became, you know, a question not just of, you know, are we going to be able to organize the city, but are we even going to be able to win one store despite everything that Starbucks was doing and like stalling our elections for ultimately about 4 months. So I didn't think that, you know, this campaign was going to spread until, you know, we had organized, you know, the industry in Buffalo and then gotten, you know, this kind of contract situation where we could line up everybody and have a general strike of the baristas of Buffalo. And then we started getting the emails, and some of them started coming in even before we'd actually won Elmwood and Genesee, and before people had seen that. And they were saying, how can we do this? So the first one was Brittany Harrison's store in Mesa, Arizona. And she was a store manager whose district manager had been sent to Buffalo to fight the union, and gave this meeting to the store managers under her control, where she was telling them in very evangelical terms about how she'd gotten a call from Starbucks and she'd been called to go to Buffalo to fight the union and try to save, she didn't say fight the union, but she said to save the soul of Starbucks from the threat of unionization, et cetera. I'm paraphrasing a little roughly, but so Brittany was fired after whistleblowing on what Starbucks was doing to fight the union. And her partners said, okay, we have two choices. We're either going to organize or we're going to quit. And, you know, they've described it as jumping out of an airplane, but they did it. And that was the first unionized Starbucks outside of Buffalo. And from there, it became a system where Starbucks partners who had, you know, been organizing their stores, like Michelle Eisen, who'd been organizing at Elmwood, started, you know, being on point with Michelle Haydock from Mesa, Arizona, to walk her through the process. And then they started organizing other stores in their areas. And now we're seeing with situations like the Pete's Coffee campaign in California, where Tyler Keeling, a Starbucks barista, is now the, you know, partner on point to actually organize workers at other coffee shops. So I think the way that this spread was really incredible, because it's, you know, underscored so many grassroots leaders like Maggie Carter in Knoxville and Nebretta Hardin in Memphis, and all of these people who, as soon as, you know, there was the infrastructure to be able to organize, like, you know, they've always wanted to be part of something like this.
Thank you. I think you bring up some really important points and lessons that have come out of the Starbucks organizing, which is there's been organizers on the ground who are organizing stores, and then in that process, people are learning how to organize and going to other stores and organizing them. And it's also crossing into not just Starbucks, but other coffee chains. Here in Madison, Collectivo Coffee has organized. And so it, like
they
you said,
organized before us.
I think, yes, but we have this, again, this industry-wide campaign that's going on, which is a fantastic way to think about, that I think historically goes back to when you were talking about the garment workers, for instance. This is a old traditional way of thinking about organizing. We have to do it across the board, and everyone needs to be involved in this. Another aspect that I've seen, and I think this historically goes back to alliances between workers, is we actually met at the United Mine Workers strike in against Warrior Met Coal in Brookwood, Alabama. And this is where I got this pin from you that I've been wearing. And so there's been also unions supporting other unions in other working people and other grassroots activism. Can you talk a little bit about support that you've gotten from other unions during this, or other workers' centers or working people or organizations that have been active in supporting you in this process?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we couldn't have done this without the support of the labor community. I mean, even our Elmwood Starbucks regulars were, either an overwhelmingly pro-union group or many of them union members themselves. And this one person, the first person who would come in every morning, went from just ordering his coffee with a, thank you, and then he would go read his paper, to like bringing us in bags of union pens. So on the very micro scale to the very broad, like, when we had strikes, we've had unions, we're working to put together, a much more coordinated effort to have unions adopt stores and help us build the infrastructure to really put pressure on this company to get them to end the union busting and, pay a consequence for what they're doing. And I think it's also been incredibly meaningful for Starbucks workers going through the process to be able to, see other workers' struggles and support those. When we were getting to our votes in Buffalo, the CWA was on strike at some of the local hospitals, and our committee members would, go down and join their picket lines and, get that sense of community and solidarity that kind of helped keep them going through a pretty intense anti-union campaign at Starbucks. So yeah, it's been really, really amazing to see all of the overlap and solidarity between unions.
Thank you. And when you talk about the anti-union campaign, this is something that you've been engaged with at every level, at your own store, across the board, and very personally. So would you feel comfortable talking a little bit about the circumstances that the National Labor Relations Board ruled that you were illegally forced out of your position, and what going through that board process was like, and the outcome, the results of that happened, were issued very recently?
Yes, for sure. So basically, Starbucks started creating new rules that they had never enforced or never, had in the company at any point in their previous 50 years. But as soon as we started organizing, they started creating these. So one of those was that you could no longer have limited availability. There were a lot of Starbucks partners who would work 1 or 2 days a week because they liked working at Starbucks, but they had other jobs or other commitments or were in school and couldn't, work more than a shift or 2 a week. So Starbucks eliminated that first in my store and 2 others, and then started spreading it across the country in an attempt to get more partners pushed out of their jobs. After a kind of long scheduling standoff, they forced me to quit by weaponizing my availability against my coworkers and saying, that it was my fault that the store was short-staffed and that they should blame the union and not Starbucks. So the labor board is now prosecuting Starbucks for that. So it's going to trial in another month or 2, and we've already had, many trials across the country, including trials here in Buffalo, where Starbucks lawyers from Littler Mendelson, their union busting law firm, literally committed more unfair labor practices while trying to defend Starbucks against their unfair labor practices. So a side of ULPs with their ULP trial. So kind of excited for that process.
Yes, thank you so much. And what got that ball rolling was the NLRB ruling, right? That it was illegal practices that were forcing you out, and then
Yes.
to actually see that they're going to be prosecuted for that is a huge victory, and really shows the composition of the National Labor Relations Board and what they're trying to do to support workers right now, I think. So I have 2 sort of general questions for you, because I want to think about how we're talking to young workers during our organizing conversations and ways that we can improve on doing that. And you have a lot of experience with that. So I'm going to throw out these two broad questions that I'm sure you address in the organizing conversation, because I'd love to hear your perspective on them. And the first one is, what is a union? What is this thing that I should join? And the second is, why do you think it's important for young people to join unions, for young workers to be part of a union? So when you're having that conversation, how do you address those aspects with workers?
So to the what is a union point, a union, is a group of workers getting together to have workplace democracy and to have an independent organization that's getting its power, not from the company, not from, some benevolent kind of top-down bestowing of power, but from the workers themselves. And, it doesn't have to be a confrontational thing, although companies often make it so, but it does have to be, an independent organization that fights for all of its members and, that has the local autonomy to actually, listen and be directed by the members. And, in all of our unions, it's, the actual workers at the bargaining table and deciding what's going to be fought for in the contracts and, making the TikToks and Twitter posts and everything. So at all the different levels and strategic points.
And then to follow up on that, we've seen this wave of young workers who are interested in unionizing. Like the example that you gave, there were emails coming in while you just had started your campaign. And so it feels like there's this new awareness. Statistically, we're seeing union approval rates at the highest since they've been since the 1960s. How do you think unions specifically benefit young workers at this period in time and at this place that our economy currently is as well?
Well, I think young workers are overwhelmingly in industries with some of the lowest levels of union density. And I think that, there's no such thing as low wage work. There's work that's not unionized yet. And if we keep organizing workplaces, then we can change the trajectory of, what work looks like and what jobs look like and what a career should be, because there's no reason why people who love working at Starbucks, love being baristas, love the service industry, shouldn't be able to have careers in this industry instead of just being relegated to, this being low wage work. And I think that transcends, just the service industry. And, I think people are realizing if you have a job, you need a union. And people are seeing, especially with the pandemic, but not just because of the pandemic. I mean, a lot of the health and safety issues have been going on forever, but I think there's a higher understanding of the way that companies will try to make people, choose between their health and a paycheck, and people shouldn't be, putting their lives or their bodies on the line for their jobs. And a union, is one of the best ways to make sure that people are actually able to look after their health and safety, including mental health, including all of the other things, while still having a, decent standard of living.
Thank you so much. I think that was really beautifully said. And it speaks to both the big issues and also your personal connection, and that you understand the struggles and have been in the trenches. It's very, very clear with you explaining that. Would you like to share anything with the trajectory that your work is currently going, and any of the campaigns, either Starbucks related, coffee related, or new organizing that you are doing currently?
Sure. No, I'm super excited. We have, we're still organizing more Starbucks stores. We just had a vote count in Syracuse, which organized the first store in Syracuse. We just had a co-op grocery store victory and a voluntary recognition, another coffee shop in Buffalo to try to help grow the industry project. And then yesterday, we just launched a campaign at the Tesla plant in Buffalo, which I'm incredibly excited about. It's, a fantastic committee that, as soon as they were public, everybody else was like, oh my God, where have y'all been? We've been waiting for this. And so there's a lot of momentum and excitement there, and it's really, really cool to watch.
That is all super exciting work, and thank you so much for doing that. If there's anyone who wants to support any of this work that you're doing, can you give us any ideas of what we can do to support those campaigns?
Yes, of course. So to support the Starbucks campaign, we're launching or expanding the Adopt a Store project. So going to our website and getting involved or signing up to give us your contact information is the best way to, stay in the loop for future opportunities to, volunteer on a picket line or become a store captain to help us build out that infrastructure to put pressure on Starbucks. With the Tesla campaign, we're in the very early stages, so that I'm sure there will be new asks. Right now, our Twitter account has been shadow banned, but it's at United_Tesla, but you have to go to at the specific page to find it. But I think just following the social media accounts and, watching for updates there would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'll also mention that there was a New York Times article that came out yesterday with the launch of the Tesla campaign. So if anyone wants to check that out, they can get some more information there.
And quick plug for the Bloomberg story that came out first, which was super helpful too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I really appreciate it. Yes, I saw that one as well. It did slip my mind, but thank you. So are there any things that are any closing issues that we haven't talked about? Anything else that you'd like to mention? Anything that you'd like to use? I think we have a couple minutes left. And so if we skipped anything or there is anything that you would like to emphasize, I want to give you this time to go ahead and share any of that with us.
I mean, I think we covered pretty much everything. To any, folks who are trying to, get more information on, what a union is or why you should join one. It's a little hokey, but, I always go back to Eugene Debs and, his speech to the jury about while there is a lower class, I am in it, and while there is a criminal element, I am of it, and while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. And I think, labor history is a great place to go for burnout prevention because, there's always somebody, no matter what union busting you're facing, there's always somebody who had it worse. So with that, maybe some perspective and some, grounding and like, this is why we're fighting these fights.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that was one of the things that we initially bonded over. We bonded over our experiences, our shared experiences at Oxford and our love of labor history. And you are an impressive labor historian. So I love the way that you tie it to the present and are able to see that it's cyclical. And some of those organizing tactics that you're using are brought into the present through social media, through all of that, but it's also echoing organizing tactics we've seen in the past, looking across industries, building grassroots organizing, creating alliances between unions, all of that. And so I appreciate how you connect those two things up. I thank you for taking the time today and commend the work that you're doing. I know that if there's anything that I can do to help or any of us can do to help, please do reach out and let us help support this really groundbreaking, amazing work that you're part of to help bring the labor movement into the present and into the future and grow it the way it needs to be grown. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jaz.
Thank you.
See you later, and we'll keep up with everything you have going on.
Amazing. Thanks.
Bye.